It's time for another episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show, a podcast where I connect you with thought leaders from across the globe, digging into some of my favorite topics like personal development, marketing, spirituality, and pretty much any other shiny object that happens to catch my attention. Today, my special guests are Amy Posey and Kevin Vallely, and we're going to be discussing their recent book, Wild Success, 7 Key Lessons Business Leaders Can Learn from Extreme Adventurers. Amy, Kevin, it is truly an honor. Welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Shaun. Thanks.
Yeah, great to be here too, Shaun.
I'm already super impressed because you're waiting for each other to speak instead of talking over each other at the same time. You are truly you're Zoom professional. So I'm already excited. It's going to be a great conversation. The place I love to start every talk is with a bit of uncovering the author's origin stories. So in terms of the people who are encountering each of you for the first time today, what are a few things that they need to know about you? Give us some context.
Go for it, Kevin.
Okay, great. Thanks, Amy. I'm Shaun. I come from both the adventure space as well as the executive business space, and I bring those two together. But where I really come into this with my strength is that I've been an internationally recognized explorer for the better part of 2 decades, having done a number of major expeditions over the years. And the wisdom I've been able to accrue in those incredible environments is what I bring to the table in this, and including a world record ski to the South Pole, as well as some major expeditions over the years that have given me a real deep insight into all the lessons that we talk to in the book.
And I come from the business / neuroscience / adventure space, because I feel like anybody worth their weight these days has sort of that slash going on in their lives. So spent 20 years in business, leading some small businesses, being a management consultant for 10 years. And then about a decade ago, I started to look into the neuroscience of our behavior and started to go deep. And so built in science into my practice, and it never looked back. And I don't have quite the adventure creds as Kevin does, but I love to explore and have been on mountains, enjoying space and time outside on all 7 continents. So love to travel and explore and go on adventures. Maybe not record breakers, but some pretty good ones on the list.
Well, thank you for those introductions and helping us to get to know a bit about each of you. Next, let's get into the story behind the book. Now, you collaborated on a project. That's nothing to take lightly. Working together on a book is an experience and a journey. So I'd love to hear a little bit about why you decided to collaborate, partner together for this book, and then what made you finally decide to take a leap? Because it's one thing to talk about doing it. It's another thing to say, yeah, let's bring this project to life.
So I think a couple of years ago, this book has been in the making for a while. So Kevin and I both work at a company that does adventure-based leadership development sessions. And probably about a year after I even started working with the company, I thought, oh, these stories need to be captured in a book. And I like to write, but it was one of those things where it was always sort of busy and hectic. And so Kevin joined and had already sort of done an adventure and written a book about it. And so we sort of dabbled with the idea like, oh yeah, we should write a book. But then we went to a major conference where our publisher was, and she sort of walked by our booth and said, have you guys thought about putting this into a book? And I'm like, well, yes, but and she's like, here's my card. And so it sort of was one of those like, are we up for it? Absolutely. Are these stories that we want to share and tell? Yes. And so it was kind of a right place, right time excitement that got us over the line to even start and work on it. And I think we were both excited to work with each other on it because we had worked with each other from a business standpoint, but like couldn't imagine the process going any better than it did. And everyone's like, oh, what's that like to write a book? I'm like, it's actually fun and really enjoyable with a partner who's good at writing and has fun. Like I think we counted, we had like one minor disagreement on the whole, like in the whole process. And so being able to work with each other and being generous in terms of feedback and, poking at each other and saying like, how great can this really be? Drove us both, I think, to create what we did. So a lot of people say writing a book is a tough process. I'm like, well, if you get the right partner and have everything sort of set up and you've been thinking about it for years, it's actually not too bad.
And Shaun, there, I'd like to add one more thing to that is Amy and I did an expedition together as part of that company, the AIP group that we're both part of. And we traveled to Baffin Island. Baffin Island is the 5th largest island in the world in the Canadian high Arctic. And we did an expedition across Baffin Island as part of our team. There was 11 of us. And out there, we were just kind of musing with the idea of the book at the time. And that really distilled it for us, is that we have to do it. The experiences we're seeing out here in this environment, very, very harsh environment, minus 40 degrees with polar bears roaming around, that sort of stuff, is that it gave us some great insights into everything we talk about: resilience, grit, cognitive reappraisal, growth mindset, so on and so forth. So it was a very powerful example to us and really got us kickstarted on the process.
And for people who they aren't authors or they don't work in the publishing industry, one thing people often don't realize is that books are birthed in that kind of 12 to 24 month period leading up to the time that the book magically appears on the bookstore shelves. And there's really no way either of you could have imagined or known the chaotic season your book would be releasing into. So as we consider, say, the challenges that many of us are facing right now in both our personal lives, our professional lives, to some degree, why is the message of wild success needed now more than ever? You couldn't have known the environment it would release to, but it feels like it's a message that is needed for our time.
Well, I'll jump in really quickly there, just from the vantage point of adventure. And Shaun, the reality is adventure is doing an adventure is taking on the unknown and expecting the unexpected. So in many ways, what we're going through now is exactly what adventurers go through in that environment. If you're going to do something, when I tried to row across the Northwest Passage, it had never been done before. So I knew going out there that I was going to see things that I couldn't even anticipate, because how could you if no one's done it before? So expecting the unexpected is critical in that, and how do you navigate that? So that's something you're going to see a lot in the book, and how you deal with that. And it speaks directly to what we're all going through now. And being able to look at it, reframe it, see it for what it is, and potentially see potential out of it rather than the negativity out of it, I think it's very important.
Yeah, and most of the book focuses on dealing with challenge. And I think that those lessons are ringing especially true right now. I mean, from that standpoint, lots of people want to talk about some of the things in the book that help you build the internal fortitude to go through something really hard and come out the other side better for it. And so I think that's helpful to have a different context to talk about it in. You can draw those parallels and take the meaning out of it, and then apply it to what's happening in your day-to-day life. And so we've had to sort of pivot our original discussions around the book from just adventure to sort of how do you use these skills right now in COVID, in what's happening, in turmoil. And that's been, I guess, helpful. Like, not a space I love to spend time in. None of us do, but it's been, I think, helpful for people to use it as a context to take some perspective, which I think is great for finding a different use case for why the book is good for people right now.
And one of the wonderful things about books is people will often apply them to their life, maybe in ways that you never imagined. And although I might assume your book had a context more of leadership, business leadership, I feel like the place it's going to really meet a need right now is personal leadership. People can't just be on autopilot. They're having to face a lot of harsh realities and choose to intentionally lead in their lives in a way that they never have before, or maybe in a way that they just hadn't been doing recently. So I think the book definitely meets that kind of a felt need. For this next part of the interview, I would love to get into a few of the key lessons that you share throughout the book. So first, I'd love to have you take us into cognitive reappraisal. Why is that going to be an important skill as we navigate the setbacks and pivots in the coming months? We've seen a lot. We still don't know what's coming. How can cognitive reappraisal help us frame things properly?
Yeah, Shaun, I think it's a really important skill because the way that our brains work, we're negatively wired. And so when bad things happen to us, oftentimes it's hard not to, fall victim to that mentality of woe is me and this is really tough and how am I ever going to get out of this? And that's been sort of the way our brain is set up through history because our biology hasn't caught up with sort of our modern trials and tribulations. And so the idea of reframing is being able to sort of flip that switch and really think about what can I take from this experience? What am I strengthening? What am I improving on? And to see it differently. Where are the silver linings? What are the happy things that come from this? And what's interesting is I've been talking to a lot of people in business about the book, and we've kind of talked about it in the sense of it gives language to maybe things that you've done in the past, but it gives a much more sort of language and approach to it that feels helpful and something that you can also teach others. So the idea of cognitive reappraisal isn't a new idea. It's looking at that silver lining, but to understand the mechanics behind it, to understand what are the signals and triggers that happen for us to then jump into it and actively and intentionally think about situations that are challenging for us. That makes the difference for people to have that language around it, to talk about it, to teach others, and to think about it for themselves. And so I think a lot of it is seeing the benefits, seeing what we can pull from this, even though it's maybe not what you planned, maybe not what you wanted. Part of it is thinking about, oh, I get to spend more time with my family. Oh, I get to work on those projects that maybe I didn't have time because I was so busy and I was traveling or doing whatever. I can actually go deep onto something. I can spend more time on personal care, things that I've neglected. There's a lot of things that can come of challenging situations, and those pivots, being able to reappraise them when it's something that you can't control is really helpful to be able to move forward in actionable steps. And I think you're right that people are more focused on their own personal leadership right now, just because how you come out of this and the decisions and choices you make during uncertain circumstances, that defines who you are as a person and as a leader. And so I think it's important for people to take a second to reflect on it and slow down. And I think that's, there's been a forcing factor, but I think it's okay.
And in the book, it's very much about personal leadership in so many levels. In our chapter on cognitive reappraisal, we talk about Mark Matthews, one of the greatest big wave surfers in the world, and how he navigates his incredibly stressful world and difficult world of big wave surfing. And we're talking a guy who surfs waves the size of 5-story buildings here, Jaws and so forth, Nazaré in Portugal. And Mark's story is fascinating, and being confronted with really a life-changing injury and how he was dealing with that in hospital, and how he had made cognitive reappraisal a habit. And that's what we want listeners here to do in reading the book and understanding that reframing is not something that, I can just do that. Well, actually, you can, but you need to practice it. So when things get very, very difficult, you naturally drift towards it rather than spiraling into what invariably is the case of negativity, which is often the case. And even Mark himself had dealt with that, was able to do a quick reframe in the hospital when he was there. Read more about it in the book, to set him on the course of coming back from an injury that he was told he'd never walk correctly again, and certainly never surf. And he's going on some big waves again. So it proves what we can do.
Next, talk to us about grit, that passion to prevail. Why is that another skill set that is very critical right now?
Well, I'll continue on. There is grit is we profile in the book Paul Gleason and Tori Holmes, two young ocean rowers at the time who had never actually rowed before in their lives, and actually decided that they wanted to row across the Atlantic Ocean. And it's all about, it's this passion and perseverance. And there lies the key, is the two together. And having this passion to do something when things get difficult, and the tricks and ideas on what to do when out there. And we profile these two amazing adventurers as they embark on a journey that truly, by all standards, was impossible for them to ever achieve. And somehow, not due to their skill, but really due to their grit, they got themselves across, when a lot more skillful people had to be rescued in the process. So it's a fascinating capacity that we can build upon. and something actually Amy might want to talk a little bit more about in terms of neuroscience.
Well, and part of it too is just recognizing that, when you want something different, hard, big, that it takes a lot of effort and deliberate practice, and the time that you have to take to plan for things and to work hard. I mean, Paul and Tori's story is kind of fascinating because they had full-time jobs and things to do, but they decided to plan and put the effort in for over a year for this endeavor. And the idea that they had to let go of some things and make some very deliberate choices on what they were doing day to day, it doesn't just happen. And so part of it is like to manifest things in your life that are worthwhile, that are valuable, that are hard to do. It's about making choices, and to reaffirm those choices, about letting go of things that you don't need, that don't serve you, that that you try things and that you do so with a really positive attitude. And that's, I think, some of the secrets to getting through tough times, is to look at the glass half full, but also understand that there's effort here, and it's things that you see from others. And that's the thing, when you turn the lens on yourself, you can kind of work through it, but when you see others and you think, oh, that must be so easy, it's not. They're taking the time and effort. It may not be as overt, but that idea that you've got to make plans and put in effort and be determined around it and keep trying, I think is key. That good things often take struggle. Unfortunately, that's kind of one of the things that, in looking at all of these sort of capacities throughout the book and emotional intelligence in general, like it takes discomfort and it takes a lot of effort. None of these things come easily, which is, putting the language around leadership. It's like, that's why being a leader is hard, and it's not automatic, and you can build and grow it, but boy, it's tough, and you got to put yourself through the paces.
We've already been talking throughout the interview that there's just a lot of unknowns on the road ahead. And I think in terms of facing unknowns, that's when the fear of failure can be looming large. It can be something we really have to face. And so with fear of failure maybe feeling a little bit bigger than it has sometimes in the past, how can nurturing a growth mindset help us keep moving forward?
So I'll jump in. The idea of growth mindset, I think, is really powerful and transformational for people who actually deeply get it. And the idea of failure, it just becomes another thing. It's not something to be afraid of. It's an instructional data point that essentially comes in and says, hey, you know what? When you screw something up, it's actually a really rich learning opportunity, and that you should pursue failing at some things, right? So I'm based in Silicon Valley. I've been working with tech companies for years and years and years, and they still struggle with it, but most of the good ones understand that you've got to fail a bunch of times before you can achieve success. I mean, it's from an innovation standpoint, but growth mindset helps you figure out internally, like, how do I look at failure? How do I not realize that it's not the end of the world if something doesn't go well, and that if I fail, I can learn from it. And pursuing failure as part of the learning process, I think it flips a switch in you, because you reduce the amount of fear that comes from making decisions, going after things. You reduce the inhibition of like, oh, I don't want to look silly. I don't want to look dumb, which is something that the imposter syndrome is still rampant. And so part of it is, being able to take the idea that this is everything I do is an opportunity to learn and grow. Then failure just becomes another step in that path, not something to avoid or not pay attention to. And so I think that it's helped my own thinking in the course of the last 5 years to really think like, okay, I'm going to try this out. I'm going to experiment with it. I'm going to learn something from it. And if it doesn't go well, I'll probably learn more than when it does go well. So I think that's part of, making that shift to growth mindset. And there's 6 or 8 other factors in there that I think are important, but your approach to failure really can transform what you go after and what you actually can achieve.
And this is what you'll enjoy reading the book, is that looking through the lens of the adventurer, because the adventurer invariably is failing. The whole essence, again, of adventure is not expecting to actually succeed necessarily. You just don't know what you're getting yourself into. So how do adventurers deal with failure? Embracing it as it's as common as anything for us in that realm. So it's really kind of cool. We profile Matt McFadden, a North Pole skier, as well as open ocean sailor, who has faced some failures in his day and certainly he almost was killed. In fact, sailing to Antarctica and back when his boat was flipped upside down and him on top of it at the time, and watching him and how he adapted to that and grew from it, and ultimately became an internationally recognized polar explorer because of it. So it's really kind of a fascinating journey, but understanding that mindset, looking through the lens of an adventure.
This next one I am regularly talking with my authors about, and that is the importance of knowing your why. You know, what drives what you're doing. Really, no matter the season of life that we're in, whatever we're facing, it's always important to know our why, our purpose. I would love for you to talk to us about how aligning our goals to a clear and well understood purpose, how does that bring meaning and motivation to the work we're doing?
What's critical, I'll jump in, it's absolutely critical to have that. It's the foundation of everything, because when things go sideways as they're doing now, it's when you fall back on your purpose. I mean, that is the foundation. We have goals, and goals can change, but purpose doesn't. And it's something we have to reflect on, and it's not easy to find, and we spend a chapter talking about purpose and being able to come to terms with it and understand it. And we profile Ross Savage, open ocean sailor, a rower, world record ocean rower. In fact, she's the greatest ocean rower in the world. And her process was fascinating. She came to it looking at an obituary on a train going in for her management job in London, recognizing she was not happy with what she was doing, and reading the obituary section in a newspaper going, what's my obituary going to be like? And that night she went back and she wrote 2 obituaries. She wrote the one that she would love to be, the person she wanted to be, and also she wrote an obituary about the person who she was. And it began her on her course to changing her life and finding her purpose. And it was absolutely fascinating. For her, fairly radical in a sense that she left everything behind. Her husband, her home, her career. She walked away from everything and found some deep meaning and purpose in her ocean rowing, and what she could leverage from it to share with the world.
And there's so much from both an individual and an organizational standpoint that when you look at purpose and when you're purpose driven, there's so much science behind why that's so good for us. So just from a personal health perspective, like having meaning and going through life with meaning and attaching your work to meaning, reduces cognitive decline. It reduces risk of Alzheimer's. It improves your cardiovascular system. Like it's a health thing, which was kind of an aha for me. And to see leaders demonstrating that in the business world, right? And leading from purpose, something bigger than just the bottom line, just making money, but being able to grow organizations that were more attractive for talent to come and work there. Organizations who are driven by purpose versus the bottom line have a much different profile in terms of what they're able to achieve and accomplish, but also are much better places to work for people. And so you even in the last 5 to 8 years, I've seen this dramatic shift, and the demand for people who want to work at those organizations goes through the roof, because it just creates that meaning and makes life and work life much more productive and effective when you're all working towards this same purpose that serves beyond just corporate shareholders, right? So I think that's another piece that's super important about purpose. It has these very long-ranging benefits, both individually and organizationally, that are amazing to explore. And I've been having conversations around this chapter, and most people haven't thought about their own purpose, haven't ever written it down, might be sort of linger in the back, like, oh, I do this for my kids, or I do this because, I like to take a couple of weeks off every year. But that deep and understanding of yourself and your purpose. And I think, like Kevin, like it doesn't go away. It may shift a bit, but it doesn't go away. And being able to define that as early as possible in your sort of outlook, and it doesn't have to be very narrow. It can be very broad, but it helps in so many ways and helps you align much quicker, and you can find a lot more happiness that way.
And in terms of the reader's journey with the book, when they get to the last page of Wild Success, what's that big idea? What's that resounding message you want every single reader to take away, to have heard loud and clear?
I'll jump in really quickly there. I saw the hesitation. No, you go ahead, Amy. I was like, hesitation. I wasn't sure. But I'll jump in really quickly. From my vantage point is that we can all do this. And we end it with a story about Sir Ernest Shackleton, who's considered the most amazing leader, by many considered one of the greatest leaders ever. A superhuman figure that one could emulate as best they can, but can never really match. And interestingly, what we discovered through it, and before I headed to the South Pole in southern Chile, in the small community down there, I had read a placard up on the wall of a building saying, this is where Sir Ernest Shackleton had his nervous breakdown, waiting to go rescue his men on Elephant Island. And I remember it was just like a slap in the face for me, discovering this great leader was human. He too, the one who did succeed at rescuing all his men on Elephant Island, and who arguably, again, one of the greatest explorers ever and leaders ever, was a human being like the rest of us, and had weaknesses and was able to overcome them and build his skills and build back his resilience again to go out and save his men. So I fundamentally there at the end of this read is that we can all enhance our skills in every one of these areas. There's nothing superhuman about the people you read in this book. What's incredible is that they've been able to build these superhuman abilities, but they're very much human beings like the rest of us, that we all can do that as well.
Yeah, to echo that, it's a bunch of stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things through effort and determination. And I think that's part of the lessons that we wanted people to take away, to really realize that any one of us can grow these skills and take on whatever we want to take on. And it may not be an adventure in the mountains or the oceans or wherever. It may be an adventure in your day-to-day, but the idea is that you can grow and develop forever and just work at it.
And for the listeners, the viewers who would like to connect with each of you, find out more about the book, where can we do that on the web?
So we've got a website for the book, morewildsuccess.com. And then both Kevin and I are active on social media, on pretty much all the different social medias. Find us at More Wild Success in any of your favorite social media outlets. You can find us there.
And like we do with every episode, we'll have detailed links in the show notes, places where you can connect with Amy and Kevin and pick up your very own copy of the book as well. It's time to bring this episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show to a close. Many thanks for being a part of my conversation with Amy Posey and Kevin Ballily. Once again, our book today was Wild Success, 7 Key Lessons Business Leaders Can Learn from Extreme Adventurers. If you'd like to connect with Amy and Kevin, a great place to start is the book's website. You can find that over at morewildsuccess.com. And Amy, Kevin, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing with us today. It's been an honor and a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks, Shaun.
Thanks, Shaun.